Welcome back. Today I wanted to have a chat with all of you about what I'm planting for the upcoming fall season. And maybe you haven't gotten around to starting a garden this year at all. That's okay. You still have time to grow some things. And if you're like me, you kind of get into this cycle where you do all the hard work in the spring to set everything up, and then you reap the benefits in the summer by doing all the harvesting, and then you just kind of like the cooler weather starts to set in and you're like, well, I'm just gonna like slide into the dormant season, which is fine if you want. But if you want to get another set of crops, you probably still have time. So I thought today we would just sort of go over what I'm planting. For those of you that are just joining us for this video, you probably don't know that I live in upstate New York, Zone 5. I mean, you definitely don't know. But I live in upstate New York, Zone 5. So depending on your local climate, you'll just have to tailor it according to your individual location. Welcome to True Freedom Permaculture, where I show you all the tips and tricks you need to have a green thumb, even if you weren't born with one. Okay, so one of the first things that I think about before I even decide what I want to put in the ground for the fall is what I like to eat during the cooler months. So for me and my family, that's usually like a classic roast. And there's several reasons why we like making roasts. I mean, they're delicious. And also they, will last for several meals, or they'll also feed a crowd or a large family if you have one. It's also a one-pot dish, so easier cleanup, all about it. And it's a complete meal. So you have some meat for your protein, you have your vegetables, and if you can roast some potatoes underneath your roast, then you have a starch too, or you can cook up some pasta or bake some bread or buy some bread to go with it, and then you really have a full and complete meal. So because of that, what we like to put in our roast are a lot of root vegetables. So I have some onions that I pulled up earlier this year that are curing, so hopefully I'll be able to add some of those. But as far as what I'm planting, I'm doing a lot of root veggies like beets and carrots and turnips, because those are so delicious in those meals. And some of what I'm growing for the fall, I actually started planting in the spring. For example, Jerusalem artichokes. So I can throw some of those in there, and between all of that, I'll have a really nice base for whatever I'm going to roast this year. So that would be my first suggestion, is think about what you and your family like to cook and eat during the fall and winter months, and then based on that, you can decide what you should plant. Now, the other thing I like to have on hand is a plentiful amount of greens, because they're so good for you and they're so versatile. So I like to try to work a lot into our diet if I can. And for those of you that saw my summer garden tour, you saw my kale bed, and I've cleaned it up since then. As a result, the kale is doing much better. Imagine that. But I have the kale that I'm growing there, and then also the beets and the carrots and the turnips that I mentioned, all those greens are edible too. So between those and the kale, I think hopefully we should have plenty of greens to eat this fall. I should mention too that this spring I also inoculated some fallen tree logs with mushroom spores. And this is the first time I've ever done this. And we also had a really dry summer. We had extended periods of drought. So I am cautiously optimistic when it comes to whether or not I'll get mushrooms this year, but hopefully we'll be eating some delicious lion's mane mushrooms, fingers crossed, and I can add that to our meals as well. The other thing I consider when I'm deciding what to plant for the fall is the weather of that given year. So just because it's the summer transitioning into the fall doesn't mean that your weather is going to be consistent. So for example, if you've had an unseasonably warm summer, then maybe you can predict that it might continue to be warmer than usual. And so because of that, you could plant things that tend to do better in warmer weather, and you might have a chance of being able to replant some of those crops. For example, summer squash, because maybe it takes like 45 to 60 days to maturity, so you might have time to get in another crop of those. Same thing with things like cucumbers, for example. If you have some plants, they might be looking kind of wilted by now and not doing so great, so you might be able to replace those with fresh seedlings and be able to get another harvest of cucumbers before the cold weather sets in. So that's something that you really want to take into consideration too, is the current weather, and based on that you can kind of decide how you want to play out your fall planting. And something else that I would like to mention to all of you is, as with anything that involves nature, there's always going to be uncontrollable variables to what you're doing. So sometimes nature throws you a curveball. I'm sure many of you have experienced this. I know I certainly have. And you can only control so much. So just be ready to pivot and change plans accordingly. So observe what's going on around you and just try your best. And that's all that we can really ask of ourselves. I do plan on keeping you posted on the fall happenings in the garden. Maybe I'll do another fall garden tour. And in my videos, I show you a lot of what I harvest naturally, but where I really show what's coming out of the garden is on my Instagram account. So if you want to see more of that, feel free to follow me on there. And it's about to be, as I mentioned, the time of year that I love to use mushrooms in cooking, which is why I tried to grow them this year. And one of my favorite and most commonly found mushrooms are shiitakes. And if you want to learn more about the health benefits, because there was a lot that I didn't know, and how to prepare them so that you can unlock the maximum health benefits, feel free to click on this video coming up and I will meet you over there. I'll see you soon.